All right. There was a sign-in list. If you haven't signed it, before you do tonight, if you could. I recognize many faces, not all. My name is Roy Forbes. I live just across the street on Mullins. These meetings, this is the fourth in a series of meetings we started in December, and we're going to hold them on the first Monday of every month for the foreseeable future. And the meetings are designed to provide information about preservation development issues and what are our options in terms of things we might want to address. So reviewing the December meeting, we talked about what were some of the concerns that people had. So there was some concern that if we try and address development and preservation outside of existing rules, that maybe that adds extra layers of government bureaucracy and fees, etc. There's concern the lot size to square footage of the lot of the home, so the mansionization issue. Concern about property values for current owners, replacing visible features with similar period materials. So when people are doing renovations of a 1923 home and they're replacing with vinyl windows, do we care about that? Things like that. Concern about the inability to legislate taste. If we try and take certain measures, then are we overstepping the bounds for people's comfort zones? The affordability of mandated requirements. So if you're an existing homeowner and there's certain things you want to renovate, you want to expand, but maybe there are certain kinds of rules in place that talk about similar period materials, does that make it cost prohibitive for you to maintain your home? Somebody was talking about sidewalk trees. They'd seen in an area where the sidewalk trees in the parkway space had been impacted by the nature of the development. And then others were afraid that the HPOZ board could become contentious and could become very political, personalities pitting neighbor against neighbor. There were questions about what is a McMansion, what does the interim control ordinance that many of you have heard about, and at the end, if you want, we can talk a little bit more about that for those of you who have questions. What restrictions would a Brookside HPOZ have? Well, as we'll learn, it will be up to us to determine what we would want. What would the composition of an HPOZ board be? What is the approval process of the HPOZ board? How much time does an HPOZ board approval add to renovation and construction? How to identify inventory turnover? Somebody was saying, hey, if we can figure out when some of the older, long-time residents are going to be leaving their homes, maybe we can try and find like-minded friends, etc., to move into these properties who will share certain things that maybe some of us want. Last meeting we heard from Ken Bernstein, who is the director of the Office of Historic Resources in the city's Planning and Use Management Department. He talked about HPOZ and what were some of the specifics there. Talked a little bit about our ICO, the interim control ordinance. The status of it is just that the specific language is being written by the city attorney's office in conjunction with planning and use. And tentatively in April, I believe, is when they're going to look to the city council would potentially approve. And then Ken talked about something briefly called a CDO, a community design overlay. And again, we'll come back to that at the end of this meeting. I'd like to get Ken back here because a lot of you were interested in knowing more about that and we didn't get to spend enough time on it. These meetings, I don't know if you saw Larchmont Chronicle, this latest issue, but they did a write-up on our meetings here. And in it I was quoted as saying that, and that's what it is, these meetings are agnostic, meaning we're not promoting one solution or another or any solution. These meetings are all about information gathering. Gathering information from our own neighbors, from all of you, to determine what are our concerns, and then getting input from people who have experience, like Ken Bernstein, like our esteemed guests who you'll meet in a moment, who can talk about their experiences and what they know for fact. These are not so much about us sharing our opinions, positive or negative, about one potential solution or another. Right now, we're all in the fact-gathering mode. This is all everybody taking in, hearing the same things, and determining for yourselves what you believe is the right solution, if any. The right solution may be doing nothing and just keeping on as we are. And so, please keep an open mind. Ground rules, again, this isn't about your opinion. This is more asking questions to hear about people with direct experience. So with that, our speakers this week, or this month, all are in HPOZs in the community. Those HPOZs, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are now currently revising in each of the respective HPOZs some of the conditions now?
It's being talked about.
Okay, it's being talked about. So there may be some dissatisfaction by some people with how it was, so that might be helpful for us to hear as well. With that, I'll let you each introduce yourselves, and then after that you can just talk briefly about your experience in your respective HPOZ, and then we can open it up for questions. Let's start off with Robbie.
I'm Robbie O'Donnell, and I'm from Wilshire Park.
I'm Caroline Livener. I live in Windsor Square. I'm on two different HPOZ. I'm an architect. I'm on two different HPOZ boards. I've been on Harvard Heights HPOZ board for 6 years, which is, let me get this wrong, Pico to the freeway and Western to Normandy. And I've been on the Windsor Square HPOZ board since about a year.
And if I can also add, you sit on the Park Mile Specific Design Review
I sit
Board?
on the Park Mile Specific Plan. I'm also on the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council Land Use Committee. So some of what I know is because of land use information as well.
Okay.
And Park Mile is a design review board. It's different than the HPOZ.
I'm Andrew Woodward, and I'm on the Windsor Square HPOC board, and I live in Beverly.
Okay, I should also add, because I'm sorry, I just popped in my head, we're videotaping this. I'll be doing the meeting minutes. I'll distribute it to everybody. I'm sorry I didn't get you last month's meeting minutes. I did write them up. I just haven't sent them out to everybody. But the other thing is we're going to be hopefully, there's still a little few hiccups, but we're hopefully going to be launching a website soon, brooksider.net. And among the areas of information on the site is going to be all these meetings that we've had, and you'll be able to link to the videos, refer them to neighbors if they weren't able to attend the meetings and stuff like that. So with that, Robbie, tell me, because you started your HPOZ from scratch, you were the impetus for the Wilshire Park HPOZ, correct? And so, what's working? Are there any grumblings? And
Actually, it started out a little rocky, but it has settled down a great deal. And part of that's because there's turnover in the residents, the people who are here now and bringing cases before the HPOZ board, or people who have fought specifically because they want to stay home, which is a very different situation than having an HPOZ put on you and then being told you're going to like it. So, and it's worked out wonderfully. There's been so much improvement in our neighborhood. Everything's much, much neater, cleaner. Our houses have doubled since the crash. You know, we were designated just about the same day as the big crash. And things are just much, much better than they've been.
all right.
Well, in terms of question,
Well, however you want to do it. If you want to take questions as you go along.
I have a small question here. When you say HPOZ, as I understand it, there are some HPOZs that are kind of loose in general, not a major change, and then a middle range change, and then some HPOZs that end up being quite restrictive. And so when you say your HPOZ, where would it fall in that range?
We're kind of in the middle. Angelino Heights would be on the most restrictive, like they're 360, they control the entire property, all four corners. And that's because they're Victorian houses and they need that kind of protection. Wilshire Park, there have been changes made over years. It didn't make sense to try to control more than just what's street visible, which is something that is best preservation practices in general. And then there's some that are very loose, largely because of litigation that preceded. It was compromised down to where they're very, very loose.
the two that I sit on, Harvard Heights is fairly restrictive. It's not crazy restrictive, but it is very clearly what the Office of Historic Resources would like, which is to say we really do have control. If someone wants to cut a tree down, it's an old and distinguished tree, they really do have to come to the HPOZ. We can control paint color. It's not like we say it has to be this color, but in Harvard Heights, which has most of them are craftsmen or revival housing. Somebody wanted to paint a bright blue house, and we said no. We asked her to bring in 15 different colors of blue, and we picked a color that was a more teal. She wanted something brighter, but that was something that we control. I also sit in Windsor Square with Andrew, and we can tell you that that is a very loose HPOZ, and the reason we're going back to the drawing board, at least the way I feel about it, is that the neighborhood and the board is not satisfied having an HPOZ that is as unrestricted as it is. There are things, for instance, there are houses that put a second story on that don't have historic contributing houses that don't have to come to us. There are houses we only control, stop me if I'm wrong, Brent, we only control to the facade line and a little bit back, basically where the roof ridge line would be. So people can build behind the roof ridge line things that are quite large and certainly impact the street, impact the neighbors, and don't have to come to the board. They can expand the house left and right if it's sort of a similar massing to the existing house, but then they don't have to come to the board to talk about fenestration. If the windows are quite different or if the details interfere, they don't have to come to us. So Windsor Square, even though it was I moved into Windsor Square right as the preservation plan was being adopted, even though people felt that it was going to be too much imposition, and so they, it's fairly, you can look at them and see. I wish I brought them. The Windsor Square is 1/4 of an inch, and the other ones are 1/2 an inch. It's half the number of restrictions. But the community's been upset, and the community is really, I think, without exception, really, mostly people are backing us to try to get a more restrictive plan. And Andrew's been on that board longer than I have.
I've only been on a couple of years, but I think it is, they are trying to tighten it up because there have been some projects that have just blown up completely out of what should have been or completely different from the rest of the neighborhood. And Caroline says we're a little bit loose in Windsor Square. It's only because I think everyone in the community, within the community, has a sense of what the home should be, and I think people know without being told that they can't tear down their house and build these big boxes that are being built.
I have a question. Did you guys decide on what kind of rules you were gonna have before you got your HPLC, or did you get the HPLC and then have the rules?
Well, the rules are guided by, it's a federal, I don't know the exact name of the agency, but it's the basic rules from the Office of Historic Preservation.
Well,
Secretary of Interior.
when Windsor,
It's Secretary of Interior.
no, when Windsor Square, I mean, because I moved in right when this was happening and I was interested in it. When Windsor Square was trying to do their HPOZ, there was a lot of debate. The reason it's a loose preservation plan is absolutely because the neighbors didn't want, it was a neighbor-driven thing to get it through. And we have a very high percentage of contributing structures. Windsor Square's got over 85% contributing structures. But to get it through the neighborhood, there was not a lot of support unless it was less restrictive. So it was the neighborhood driven, it wasn't.
But that was initially, but now you're seeing that there is,
There is a real, you can read the Larchmont Chronicle, you can read the Buzz. There's a lot of pushback. People want it to be more restrictive now that they see things that are being built that are in conformance with the plan, but that the neighbors object to. Bigger buildings that they are comfortable with, massing in a neighborhood that disrupts that. To me, a historic preservation overlay zone is about the zone. It's about a sense of neighborhood, so that's what I emphasize. And people, I think, feel that too. It's not so much that somebody put a pink window in or a tree or a bush they don't like, is that it disrupts the rhythm of the neighborhood. So I think there's a strong push to have the plan more restrictive.
if I can ask this, each of, so the Windsor Square and maybe even Harvard Heights, if you know, and then yours, about what percent of the neighborhood, of the total homes in your neighborhood supported forming an HPOZ, and were there any lawsuits by those who didn't want to see it?
In our case, we had no opposition at all, none.
And how many homes? 200?
We have 526 homes and no opposition. And I don't think that's because there was no actual opposition, but as much outreach as we did, the opposition didn't put its head up. So, we found out afterwards, I never wanted an HPOZ. They would come in with a case and, they'd tell us, we never wanted the HPOZ, but they never expressed themselves beforehand. And we did not have our preservation plan when we were designated because there was a certain amount of hurry up to ours. Because the planner who had helped us along was moving on to another job and she wanted to see us get our HPOZ. So we were allowed to do our preservation plan after designation, which is almost unheard of.
Okay, so your neighbors supported an HPOZ without
Yes.
knowing what the specifics of the HPOZ would be?
That's right. And the reason they did that was because the examples that we showed were very moderate. It's like paint color is designated or delegated to the planner, for example. So if you want to paint your house a different color, it's just not a big deal. It's an email. And we knew we were kind of going that way. We were heading towards something a little bit more liberal because of the nature of our buildings. So that turned out to work out just fine. I don't think anybody was surprised if, what do you mean, this is our preservation plan? It just didn't go that way.
Could you just identify Wilshire Park? Wilshire, what?
Wilshire Park is from Wilshire to Crenshaw to Olympic to Wilton. And we didn't take the east side of Crenshaw, we excised that on our side.
I don't, Windsor Square, there obviously was some issues, and that's why the preservation plan was tailored the way it was, but I don't know if there were any lawsuits in Harvard Heights, I don't know.
I don't remember any losses, but I do know that there was a lot of kickback, and the bids was liberal, and they had to have 70% buy-in before they could forward. And you're right, it had to be loose, so they would have been nothing.
That's right. I mean, Windsor Square doesn't control landscape, doesn't control color, and those are things that can be.
What about size?
It doesn't control size per se, it depends on if it's not a formula. Mostly it doesn't. If it's not visible from the street, for instance, and that includes a side street, Windsor Square, it's a complicated thing because of where that line is, but a lot of those things are not considered, and I think people are unhappy that that is the case.
Right, as we understand, the plan we're working on now is to make it more uniform, so all of our HPOZs are uniform, and we have the plan that Caroline mentioned, from the roof line of your home towards the street, you could not change, but I think they're gonna eliminate that roof line, and it's gonna be the entire, anything you can see from the street along the sides or the front.
I'll give you a for instance. I had a case that we had before us last week or the week before. There was an existing wall opening with a new window in it. It was clear it wasn't an original window. But the builder wanted to make a smaller window because the interior plan, he was adding that as a bathroom. If I had been in Harvard Heights seeing that, we would have assumed that the window opening, even though we wouldn't have had any problem putting a new window in because the window that was there was clearly not original. But if it had been Harvard Heights, unless we had a reason to assume that that opening was not right, we would have assumed that the opening was the size that the opening was designed as. And we would have asked that they put a new window in with a bigger opening, and if it's a bathroom, just put a cafe curtain or something. Being Windsor Square, we had less control over that, so it wasn't 100% clear, but the window was made smaller. It was the same location, and it's going to be a nice wood window, a double hung window, which what was there was, I don't even remember what, but there is a difference in the way that you handle those kinds of things depending on the HPOZ.
So, when you're formulating a preservation plan, is there a roadmap, a handbook that has a number of different possible options or whatever, or are you just sort of?
Well, what Andrew said is true, which is that the Office of Historic Resources is trying very hard to make the plans they can't be uniform because Angelino Heights is a different situation than Harbor Heights. They are different, but they're trying to make the plans as universal as possible. And for one thing, that also means that the planners, each of us sit with a planner on them. We have a planner who comes to the board and who provides a professional guide if you need questions about things. So they're trying to make them more uniform. So if you were looking, for instance, at what a preservation plan would look like, I think what's the most recent one? Joe. I would look at the most recent one. I can't remember what it is. It's not actually. It's gonna be.
No, that's the original.
I would look at the most recent one, and then I would assume that you would trim from that. You would start with the most recent one as the template.
Because when we got on board, we were put through as the triplets. We were 3 HPOZs with 3 different periods of significance and 3 different context statements. But everything in our preservation plan is identical. And that was specifically designed to become the template for the new HPOZs. So for example, you would have Chapter 7 refers to rehabilitation guidelines. What kind of windows, what are the general principles? Chapter 8 would be infill, things like that. So when a planner looks at it, they say, well, guidelines are Chapter 7, let's open the book. So no matter what the front end of the book is, the context statement and all that, it has a certain regularity to it, which also makes it easier for enforcement because somebody from LADBS has to take a look at this and decide, how do I write up this enforcement issue? So it's kind of like less is more. The more nuanced thing gets, the more complex it is to administer.
Do the guidelines come up for review periodically in case people, if there's a groundswell of wanting to change something? And also, what you said enforcement, how is it enforced and what are the consequences of putting in a purple window and everybody says we don't want that?
LADBS does enforcement for HPOZs, and it's complaint driven. Somebody has to call it in and say, there's a violation here, please go and take a look at it. And usually there's, in most neighborhoods where they're friendly, there's a conversation beforehand. It's like, you better call the planner and make sure this is okay. Then it doesn't get called into LADBS, it goes to the board, or the planner signs off on it. So there's a whole spectrum of things that can happen. If there's a violation and they're told that there will be a fine, and then they're also told that they have to remediate that violation. They have to either take off what they put on or get wood windows to replace the vinyl ones they put in. So there's a range of consequences for what happens when there's a violation.
And what about the periodic review? Is there a review a few years down the line?
Yeah, they encourage that.
But I don't think it's scheduled. So.
Yeah.
No, it's not scheduled, but they encourage it. They try to get you to have enough to make it worth reprinting all of the preservation plans too, because they try to bunch changes together and then revise them all at once.
So, I want to make sure I understand this. So when the DES is issuing a permit, they're not sitting there with the HPOZ guidelines and seeing whether what is being applied for complies. It's going to come. I mean, it seems they build something out of conformity with HPOZ, and then you have to tell them to undo
Well,
it.
here's the thing. Those are very often the things that are HPOZ violations are work that is being done without permits, which would be a violation anywhere in the city. So you go to LADBS, you get a permit, they say, this is an HPOZ, you have to contact your planner, and that's how it's supposed to go. It goes badly when they subvert the system by not getting a permit at all in the first place.
That's usually what happens, because if you have to, the building safety will basically say you need to sign off from your HPSC board before you can complete your permits. So it goes through the process.
Yeah, the HPOZs are all flagged for permits.
And many of the plans are quite specific, the size of the windows, what type of glass, whatever, but I mean, it's all written, so the contractor or the homeowner knows he or she has to hit every one of these, otherwise they could be in violation, subject to fines or citations against the property.
Wait, and maybe Owen question. So did we start thinking about HPOZ because of the mannerizations?
Right,
Was
so-
that was the beginning of it?
Right.
Or are people concerned about the overall look?
Both.
Both.
Both, but as we've learned, when Ken Dirksey was talking, that an HPOZ is not the most effective tool for controlling size. Because correct me if I'm wrong from your experience, but as we heard it, that the HPOZ is not looking at so much the square footage of the house to the lot size. But as was explained to me by one of Ken's assistants, but if you were proposing, let's say you had a very large lot, arbitrarily, a 10,000 square foot lot, and you had a 2,500 square foot home, and every other home around that was approximately the same size, and you wanted to build a 5,000 square foot home, which would be double virtually anything around, the HPOZ might have a say, potentially, but really what the size is more control, is better addressed by the basic mansionization ordinance that the city put in place now 6 years ago, I believe it is.
And you're part of that.
The city is, and they're revising the BMO, the baseline mansionization ordinance. The city council is right now reviewing it with input from the Office of Planning and Land Use Management, because there were lots of exceptions put in where you could get credits and doing certain things that would allow you to expand. And it's been seen around town that, yes, it may conform with the baseline mansionization ordinance, but it conforms to the spirit, the letter of the law, but not necessarily the spirit of the law. So they're trying to revise it, and I will send out a notice, but I think the next meeting, they've already had public input, and now I think the city council may be having one last public input before they're going to vote on some revised rules that hopefully will tighten it up.
Okay, what started my concern was not in Brookside, but those two very large, one
On
really
Sixth.
minor on Sixth, and then the other one, that's maybe giving it up a little bit, it doesn't look so bad from my point of view, although very large. Now, on our street, on Mullen, on Ninth, there's a new house that went up that is larger, but somehow it doesn't offend me. So it's like, at what point do you say, this is just a little larger and this is a mansion? Is it square foot?
Right, so back
property?
to a question that was asked way back in December, what is a McMansion?
Right.
The baseline mansionization ordinance was putting it at 50% square footage of the home to the lot size. And if you exceeded that, you would be
It would
a
be
McMansion.
So
But they
the
don't
one
say that in the
on our
baseline.
street-
The word McMansion is a
The one
popular.
across from you, is that a mansion?
No.
I didn't think so.
No.
Pastor, since I'm the recipient of most of the complaints for this general area, let me tell you what the problem is. Most of the complaints are not that much about the size, but the architecture.
Ah,
They put these contemporary homes in where you have Moroccan and obviously Mediterranean, Spanish type housing, and they put in one of these super boxes that go from lot size, from side to side, and from front to back, and it's just overpowered. In other places, they have made houses that are kind of large, but the architecture is good.
kind of
And the
fits
people
in.
aren't complaining. You know, it's, well, so it's a little bit big, but it kind of fits in. And La Brea Hancock, which is just west of Highland and
Yeah.
north of Wilshire, they put in 27 of those houses. And but
There's dwarf.
they just dwarf it, and they're super modern, and nobody loves them. You know, they just hate them, as a matter of fact. On the corner of Citrus, they put one in, what's that, 8th Street, And it's a Mediterranean type house, and it's big, but nobody's complaining about it. So it has a lot to do with the architecture.
Well, the
Yeah,
HPOZ,
so-
can I see?
Yeah, please, go back to our panel.
Okay, one problem is that it's very easy to conflate mansionization and historic preservation. Historic preservation has a lot to do with the built environment as it was and what remains. And in Wilshire Park, we do control size. We control size more stringently than the baseline mansionization. There's I think it's a 50%, if it's more than 50% of the original footprint of the building, it's considered to be non-historic, except in very strange cases where a person could do all of that behind and still have the appropriate open area that they're required. Now, baseline mansionization applies to everything from the valley all over the place. But once you have an HPOZ, the baseline mansionization kind of is like the second tier. You very rarely have to invoke it because historic principles, the Secretary of Interior Standards, really prevents you from building anything that's too large because best preservation practices say that you have to conform to the existing area in mass, size, rhythm, and fenestration. And also, we're not supposed to build fake old. So there's a lot at play here, and mansionization and historic preservation are actually two different subjects that have a bit of an overlap, like a Venn diagram, but not completely. It's not one or the other. Sometimes you need both. Sometimes just historic preservation is enough, and sometimes it's more appropriate to have just mansionization controlled if you don't have historic fabric in your neighborhood. And you guys do.
I think-
Owen was talking, oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Owen was talking about what I consider architectural bullying. A house goes up and it takes away your sun and your privacy. I
Right.
hate that stuff. I ride my bike past those places all the time. And I ask the people what business they're running. As kind of a poke at it. But if the BMO is going to be changed now, if the city council changes it so it's more restrictive and more enforceable, is making an HPOZ here a moot point?
That's a question that's been raised at each one of these meetings.
Oh.
Maybe you all have.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all, but I'm just saying, it's good that you're raising it because new faces.
I don't think so, because if you just rely on the city, Los Angeles is so darn big, they won't know. I think you need the local input of people within your neighborhood to be able to point out, no, that's way too large, or that addition is gonna block the sun of your next door neighbor. I mean, we do that all the time.
I think they're entirely different issues too. I mean, if you think about somebody taking a historic house and stripping all of the detail off the front of it, for instance, and putting on new balconies or stuccoing over wood or something like that, then the BMO would have nothing to speak to that, but the HPOZ, that's what it's about, would make sure that the rhythm of the street, the historic neighborhood, is what you're maintaining. And I understand it can feel restrictive, and probably it is, but I think that ultimately the good comes of that. In Harvard Heights, we have control over non-contributing structures as well. So that means, and Harvard Heights is a mixed commercial and residential. So when the McDonald's that's on Western, on the way to the freeway, is something that we're controlling. And we have spoken to them about the issues. Now, clearly, McDonald's is not a contributing structure, but the commercial frontage on Western has been deteriorated by having cars in front and the buildings in the back. So we have been talking to them about flipping that to a more traditional arrangement. I mean, this is still in process, and I don't want to violate the Brown Act, but those are the kind of issues we've been talking about. Having a traditional circulation so that the cars go in and are not on the street side, but go behind. Keeping a pedestrian edge on Western, because there are pedestrians there. So that has to do with the land use and the way that the building was siting, not even the detail, but we do want the details to be compatible with the neighborhood so that the scale is right. It doesn't have to have fake stone or rafter tails exposed. but it should be part of the neighborhood. Is that, you understand? Sorry, I'm rambling.
I'm more confused, but it's okay.
I was rambling, so the answer was
I
no,
know,
you weren't.
all of a sudden McDonald's is in here, but.
Because it's a non-contributing, so I'm saying it's a non-contributing structure.
Yeah, I think.
But
also-
it is
but
not
there is-
bad necessarily to have some control over non-contributing structures to see that in some ways they add to the neighborhood rather than detract.
There's a case in one of the triplets right now where it's a non-contributor on an R3 property. Right now it has a single-family home on it that was built in the 20s. It has a very small footprint. And the new proposed building is proposed by a very skilled architect. And instead of doing the allowable 11, he has opted to put in 4 units instead of 11. And the reason is because the area is historically sensitive, and that in itself adds enough value to compensate him for the loss of those other 7 units. So, you know, there's a lot of arithmetic to be done here, even on non-contributors, all of which can be demolished when they're altered. They have minimal review, but they can be demolished. And so those will be infill buildings, those will be new buildings, and they can be modern, they can be more dense, you know. These are the things that an HPOZ controls.
So is everybody clear on that, contributing and non-contributing?
No.
So as part of getting your HPOZ established, you have to have an audit, for lack of a better word, an audit conducted by an independent agency with historic preservation experience, architecture, and the city, it's from an approved list from the city, and they go home by home by home, so all 400 plus homes in Brookside. They will go and they will, when was it built, they're gonna look at it, they're gonna take photos of it, and they will then report back, develop a report and say, okay, street by street, block by block, here are the homes that are contributing to the historic purpose that you're applying for. So if we're saying we're historic back to 1923, and here are these kinds of features that are based on that, or typical of that period, they'll say, yes, if there are 10 homes on this block, and 2 of them are non-conforming, and 8 are conforming, and then they'll go like that. So then what Robbie's saying is, non-conforming homes are not subject to the rules of the HPOZ. But you also, as part of your
They
HPOZ,
were subject to not the same rules.
right, not the same rules, but there were rules for them,
It's still.
but not the same as the contributing structures.
Right, but it's part of the preservation. I mean, they're really like essentially 4 levels. There's a historic building. This building is a historic building. It's a historic cultural monument. It can be in an HPOZ, but it's a historic cultural monument. It has a different set of rules for it than just a regular building. There are contributing buildings, contributing structures within an HPOZ. And those are buildings that have not been altered beyond the, so that they still contribute. There are contributed structures that have been altered, so all the windows have been changed, it's been stuccoed over, the entry door is not there anymore, something like that. So that the massing may be the same, but there's been quite a bit altered. And then there are non-contributing, like a house that burned down and you built a contemporary house, or McDonald's is a non-contributor.
If I could just say, I was a design architect on the Mount North HPOZ for 9 years, and we did the whole preservation plan, which, when you asked the question, they all look like this. They're all about 80 pages. They're all specific to the particular neighborhoods. And that's what a planner does. You get assigned a planner. They work with you to take not just an average template of the most recent one, but what they use is a planner would recommend is be appropriate. Is there any commercial property? No, so on and so forth. The contributor and the non-contributor is almost irrelevant in Brookside, in that there are very few houses that are not contributors.
Well, I have to say, I've worked over in the country. We're really lucky in Los Angeles. You have no idea how much more. I mean, people would build something and then instead of fixing it up, they would move out to the valley. So we have an extraordinarily high percentage in our districts.
Yeah, at the last meeting, Ken Bernstein said the city did a cursory about 10 years ago, I think he said it was. They did a cursory examination of Brookside, and they, again, he said, you're going to have to do your own survey and be very specific, but their office conducted a very cursory one and said that they estimated about 75% of structures in Brookside would be contributed.
The problem, and I don't see a lot of the dissenters here, but The problem is that we've had some reconstruction and some updating of homes, and some they stripped to the floors and built back. And it built larger houses than was there before. But they pretty much kept that architecture, and there hasn't been a lot of opposition to that. The people that are complaining are concerned that that will be disallowed under the HPOZ, and that's their biggest concern. They said, well, you know, if my family changes and I want a larger house, I'd like to be able to do it. And they point out the houses, where's the house across the street from you, they did a nice job. Tore it down, rebuilt it, great house. Next corner, just a block from you, they did a hell of a job on that house right on the corner. The one just up the street from me, the guy stripped it down, rebuilt it. It's a great house. And when people talk about HPOZ, they say, would they be able to do that under the HPOZ? And that's the big bugaboo.
So that comes back to then, oh, I'm sorry, Andrew.
That's the room.
Well, I can only speak for Windsor Square. I think you just wouldn't be able to change the front facade or change the windows, so that instead of saying we can't brick it over, something like that. So yes, it does have some control, but, you know, going back, I guess they could add, going back towards the rear property line.
Yeah, that's true. But you have another problem. The complaints that I get from your area, and I'm quite familiar with it now, on Barton there on the corner of that's Barton and Third. That guy remodeled for years, and the building safety would come out, but they could never find anything wrong. And then there's another house, and I'm trying to think of the street, where they changed the apartment, the rooms inside to apartments, put 4 or 5 of them in. And they were complaining about it, but building and safety could never find anything so they could cite anybody. And there was another one, 2 or 3 of them. But you know, I get all these complaints, and I send the guys out there and tell us, well, you got to go on Saturday, and you got to go after this time, because people will say, well, look, they're here at this time, and they're not here at that time. And so it's really iffy. Now, Robbie wrote the book. She really has a template that the city uses, and she was the first, and everybody was on board for hers. I own property in Miracle Mile, and they're going through it right now, and there's not a bit of concern. And that's because they've got these big contemporary houses that they put in, and everybody's opposed to it. So they're for anything, just get rid of those, but they're there, and you gotta live with it.
But so back to those concerns, then it comes down to how you draft, how restrictive or how not restrictive,
Well-
based on your neighbors and what you think you can do.
Part of it is that, I mean, obviously how it's drawn. We try to be really fair. It's really important to treat everybody. I'm not kidding, because this is, you know, the board changes, the planners change, it's 2 years later. That's why you have a preservation plan. You want to be really clear with people that you're not making exceptions for somebody because they cry, you know.
Right.
Well, in
I've
fact,
only
that's
made
what-
one person cry. I'm just.
And that happened in just about every meeting that we would have before. It was just the Secretary of Interior Standards, and people want to know, who's the secretary and how do I write her a complaint? And that's why the preservation plans got written specifically to the neighborhoods, because then you could say, here, it's in this book, it's in this little booklet, and here's what it says. It made it very clear that it's not personal. And I did training sessions with the HPOZ boards, the new members, and that's what we said. You don't say, I like that, or I want those grills off the
But let
building.
me say-
You're supposed to say, it conforms to the preservation plan for numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
But let me also say, there is a certain amount of discretion. We had a house that somebody was applying for on Western, and they wanted a fence. And in Harvard Heights, we really discouraged fences. They were not done. This was somebody on Western with a private home on Western. We said, yeah, okay, if you want a fence, we were comfortable with that, because it didn't seem to be a big problem in terms of keeping the context of the neighborhood. So there are exceptions. That's why I said that we really don't try to break rules, but You know, if someone has a very tiny house, I think that we would be more amenable. At least that's speaking for our.
Rod, you want to make a point?
Well, one of the things that the Secretary of Interior standard says is you're supposed to save everything you can save. If you can fix it, keep it. But recently, for example, we had a house that had redwood siding, and there were sections of the redwood siding that were bad. However, they had a garage that they wanted. They were suggesting to stucco it over, which would kind of be off the table because that would turn it to a non-contributor. But they had a garage that had the original redwood siding, so the recommendation was cannibalize the siding off the garage, get as close as you can to the new artificial stuff, and put the redwood on the main structure. So even though we were supposed to maintain the materials and not just, you're not supposed to Disneyland it and make it look nice, you're supposed to retain the materials. That worked, but it's, you know, you have to bend a little, because the redwood's just not there. And it would cost more to do a garage in redwood than it would cost to tear it down and gold leaf it, so.
Yeah, Andrew, you're gonna say something?
Well, I think going back to what Caroline was saying is, we, at least on the Winter Square board, we realize that a lot of these smaller homes don't fit today's lifestyle, but we try to make sure that if they're gonna make an addition, that the additions are very similar in quality and aesthetic of the original home. So we do take into account that, you know, maybe the one-story house doesn't work anymore, but don't build a McMansion.
There was a case where there was a house that was in terrible condition, that lovely plans came in to fix it up. They really were doing beautiful work. But and as part of it, what they were showing us, it was the landscape plans for the backyard, which were quite beautiful, and they wanted to put the air conditioning unit, it was a corner house, they wanted to put the air conditioning unit on the street side so that they could do some more things in the backyard, and we haven't heard this, that was just a consultation. But we really discourage that, and the preservation plan actually says explicitly that heating HVAC should not be on a public facade. So it was a balancing between, do you give people a lot more space? I mean, it was a generous backyard. They wanted
Yes.
that, they had a pool and a barbecue area and a big patio and a lot of other spaces. But it was a balancing act. Do we give them more space in the backyard and detract from the street presence of the building? And we were encouraging them, and I think the preservation plan, when they come back to us, will show that the air conditioning units have to be in their backyard, not on the streets.
And two things. One is, so if you remember from last session, when somebody comes before the HPOZ review board, the board makes a recommendation to the city as far as permitting, you know, and all that. They don't have final say. The board does not have final say. The city has final say
No.
with the recommendation from the board,
That's only for
correct?
certificate work,
Okay.
and those are the bigger projects. For a small project, the board's recommendation stands unless it's illegal and the
Right.
planning informs you of that.
All right, so with
And
that.
also for non-contributors, if it's a non-contributor, it stays with the board
Well,
makes
but-
the decision, and downtown has nothing to do with it.
That's right.
Okay, so
who's on
with
the
that-
board is really kind of critical.
Well,
In fact,
that's what I was-
It's been
all right.
really helpful that you're here, because the one thing I put together from what Lee said, especially Bonnie's comment, that people really, you know, didn't really, they just saw that this was where they wanted to be, that they didn't feel it was forced on them, that they saw it as a benefit. And the other thing from Windsor Square, that years ago it was done, yes, to get it approved because, oh, let's make it as lenient as possible, just street, this will work, no problem. And then they found out, you're still getting this amazingly overbuilt stuff, still within zoning, still within what the ICO or BMO would allow. The difference in everything is that the HPOZ is really the only design review that has neighborhood involvement and neighborhood input.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just, you know, it's planning, it's just zoning.
And I was referring, we do have a consultation. You can come in, I mean, I don't know, there's probably is a limit on how many times you're supposed to come in, but we'll see somebody dozens of times if they want to come in for.
Our record was 9.
You had 9?
Yeah, same
I-
property.
All right, so with that, have you seen in your boards, has it gotten contentious? Because that was a concern of several people. At the December meeting, we were talking about issues, and one concern a couple of people had was, this board? Is it gonna turn into, you know, pitting neighbor on neighbor, family feud? Or have you just not seen that in your experience? And Taylor, did you see that in your experience?
I don't, there have been times where I tend to be, at least in the short time I've been on Windsor Square, I tend to be tougher. But if I say I don't think something should be done and everybody else disagrees, then they just vote me down. There've been no fisticuffs.
No, it has not been contentious, and I think it's because the community doesn't want that. I mean, we were established to try to hold the line, but I don't think we're so powerful and so unflexible that, you know, it's our way or no way, take a hike.
We were hoping for that. We were looking forward to the website and the
Okay.
Well, I will say though that doesn't mean that the people coming in, and I'm speaking for Harvard Heights now, we have had people who come in, who bought buildings and not understood what HPOZ meant. They haven't been told by their realtors. They come in and they start making changes without.
That's more
zoning
commercial
ordinance.
you're talking
No,
about.
I'm talking residential.
Oh, really?
People come in, they want, and some of these are R2, so they want, anyhow, they start doing work, they take out windows, and then it gets turned into HPOZ. And they'll come in and they're just furious, and they don't understand why what we say has any bearing on the case. The woman with the blue house came in 4 times before we could agree on a blue collar that she was happy with. So, and she was not happy, and I did make somebody cry, although didn't mean to.
So be nice to her. We've got about 5 more minutes left, and we'll take a couple of last questions. And so you know, future meetings, I think next month we've got somebody from the LA Conservancy who's agreed to come in and talk from their perspective and our neighborhood and talk about that. Want to get Ken Bernstein back or somebody from his office to talk more as we have more questions for them in the planning and use office. If you have other folks whose perspectives you think we ought to hear, please suggest it. We'll try and get them here. Any final questions for our esteemed guests?
I have a final comment.
Oh, hold on, the comment, Susan.
Hi, so we're going through this process now as a neighborhood, obviously, and there are disagreements along the line about what people want. What advice would you give us to get through this process intact as a neighborhood that works together, that's happy, and everybody's happy with the decision when it's done? So are there any mistakes that we can avoid that you guys might have made, or any good advice you could give us?
I think you should all, people who like it and people who don't, should go to an HPOZ meeting. Because I think you get a better sense about how the negotiation works, how somebody coming in and feeling grumpy might be soothed, how somebody might be educated, how somebody who has a project that's terrific gets approved and appreciated and thanked. And we are grateful for people who are doing the work well. You can't tell you how pleasant that is. It's really, it means a lot to us. And as you see projects develop and get built and are done well, it's lovely. I do want to put in a word for, I'm on the board of the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, which is a lovely group, and you should all probably join, or somebody should join, and then spread it around. It's nonprofit. But it's mostly professionals, but it's the people who run preservation all over the country. And so and there's a listserv, so they'll bat around ideas about shingles or different laws. You know, what happens when somebody has to tear something down because it's falling apart? What do you do? Benign neglect, what do they call it? Demolition by neglect. How do you handle it? Anyhow, they bat that around. They're having, I'll be there, their semi-annual meeting in July in Mobile, Alabama.
You have all.
I know, July 20th, great time of year to be in Mobile. July 27th to 31st. It's just, it tells you about how these things work out across the country.
Okay, Robbie, or
Can I ask one more question? I'm
No,
sorry.
no, you
can
gotta
ask
look in, because we gotta be out of here at 8, the library closes at 8.
I was gonna say real quickly, I think it's preserving the neighborhood keeps the value up, and that's what brought them to this neighborhood. Yeah.
Okay, nothing else to add that way. So you know, also, what do we have? We'll have an April and a May meeting, maybe a June meeting, but then we'll take a break for the summer. And probably by then, in the fall, we'll have another series of meetings where it'll then be us discussing amongst each other, airing our opinions, airing our, any other questions we need, begin to start winnowing down and coming up with an idea as a neighborhood, what do we want to pursue?
I want to say thank you for being here. I mean, it's
No,
really
thank you
great.
guys for, you don't have a dog in this fight, so thank you guys for coming.
No, we should, it's good for the city to have the more preservation there is, the better it is for the city.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah.